Hello, and welcome to this Jeffrey podcast, Tiermaker edition, this one featuring Pink Floyd. My name's Gordon. I am here with my brother John.
Hello.
And we're going to produce a Tiermaker ranking of the Pink Floyd albums from our podcast we did a few years ago. So we will be reflecting that, and we may not 100% agree with it. So feel free to comment anyway and let us know. So you can check online jeffreymusic.rocks for articles and links to our regular podcast. So let's kick it off. So first album, Piper at the Gates of Dawn from 1967. This was a bit of a mixed bag, I thought. There's some really good tracks on it, and then some really sort of quite annoying whimsy, as I think we used the word whimsy quite a lot when
we
talking
did
about this album.
Psychedelia and whimsy, but yeah, also some like top crackers on here as well. But yeah, a bit of it's very highly rated, I think, because Syd Barrett has this aura about him of being this lost genius. And maybe at the time that's what it felt like, but I think it's dated pretty poorly. I don't think Psychedelia really stood the test of time. So I agree with you. I think it's quite a difficult album to listen to all the way through. So I would probably be putting it in the Now Special category, but really it's not Now Special. It's partly splendid, partly mostly clanger. So on average, I think it's probably around Now Special.
Yeah, I think it's half. I would say it's sort of half decent, half Now Special, even maybe dropping into clanger and splendid, like you say. But it would be somewhere in the middle of the two. Shall we put it Now Special for now?
I'll put it there. I mean, this is the problem of the way that we've named the ranks, because really it's kind of a mixed bag, as you started by saying, rather than it being Now Special. Actually, some of it really is quite special and some of it really isn't. But there you go. We are prisoners of our structured system here.
Yeah, we'll go to the next album, 1968, A Saucer Full of Secrets. This is, of course, it does feature a little bit of Syd Barrett, but this is Pink Floyd trying to find the feet pretty much without him. Again, there's some really good bits on here, but it's not the strongest listening experience, I would say, but a definite improvement.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think it's a more coherent version of the previous album. As you say, Syd Barrett's been replaced by David Gilmour, but Roger Waters is stepping forward more as the main songwriter. So it just feels a little bit less whimsy, a little bit more profound, perhaps. So from our point of view, this was a step forward and easier listening. Some better stuff on here, which I feel the strong tracks here do feel like they've stood the test of time a little bit better, but he's still quite mixed.
Yeah, I don't massively enjoy listening through the whole thing, but there are sort of moments, and obviously it has one of the best opening first few seconds of pretty much any albums, really.
Yeah, well, yeah, agreed. Any album ever. The opening is wonderful.
But yeah, in terms of ranking, obviously Piper at the Gates of Dawn, we ranked 12th. This is out of 15, and this is quite a few up. So this was ranked at number 8. So are we into the realms of decent here, I think?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I think we are. Yeah.
But definitely also, I think, not splendid.
Oh, yeah. It's not splendid.
So next we come to More, the film soundtrack from 1969, which I personally found a bit of a nothing record. It is a film soundtrack, so that's fair enough. But in terms of a listening experience, definitely not for me. And obviously it's between Now Special and clanger for me. Clanger's probably a little bit unfair because it is a film soundtrack.
Yeah, I think it probably is a tad unfair. I think it's probably... I mean, there are a couple of good tracks on here, but yeah, it's not an easy listen because it's a film soundtrack, but there are some good songs, like Cymbeline, like Niall's song. So, yeah, I think it has to go into just about Now Special.
Yeah, I mean, it is ranked 14th out of 15, so yeah, it is the bottom end of Now Special.
They did Saucer Full of Secrets, which is essentially how can we be the same band without Syd Barrett? Then they get the opportunity to do a film soundtrack. So it does feel like this is a band scrabbling around a little bit to realise what is our sound, what are we here for, who are we? Because this then going into the next album feels similarly a bit lost.
Let's go straight there then. So 1969, Ummagumma. I think Lost is definitely right. I mean, obviously it's not even a Pink Floyd album, is it? It's section. They all take a little bit of the album and do solo bits. And I think probably like you say, I think they're obviously missing Syd and don't really know what to do. But
without the structure of a film soundtrack, they seem to be like not really sure what to do. So yeah, by the way, we should just say we're not talking about the live album here, which is actually really good. We're just talking about the studio album, because we don't do live albums. And it really is rubbish. Quite frankly, it's a clanger.
I would say it's certainly over half of it. It's definitely unlistenable. There are some all right bits in it, but there's nothing... If we're doing the tracks, I don't think the tracks would get beyond Note Special.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Definite clanger. And I think, like you say, probably struggling to work out what to do without Sid. I hope that's their excuse anyway. It is a mess.
Yep.
So next, 1970, Atom Heart Mother. And I think this is kind of like the opposite in a way. They are very much beginning to find the Pink Floyd that we all know and love. And this is really, I was going to try to not to use the word decent. But I was going to say it's, so I think I probably would put it in decent anyway. So I think it's definitely a decent album.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's the first proper post-Sid album, maybe, but it is the one where I mean, they don't like this album because they think the first side, Atom Heart Mother, The Amazing Pudding, is a bit of a mess and it's quite Ron Geesin-led. And it doesn't really sound that much like Pink Floyd. And in that, I would completely agree. But I also do really like it. And then the second side, you've got 3 pretty decent songs, one each by David, Roger and Richard. And then you've got this rubbish, which is somebody making their breakfast. Alan's Psychedelic Breakfast, which I just think is nonsense. So it is a funny old album, but it is one that I do really like. So top end of decent? Is that where we're going with this one?
I think Splendid is too much, isn't it? So, and it's definitely not now special.
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
So next album is 1971's Medal, which I think is probably my favourite Pink Floyd album, but with the caveat I accept that some of the others are
the whale song.
They're probably better, but my sort of heart has always been with Medal. Yeah, I mean, the Whales, we have discussed this in other episodes, I think in one of the Jeffrey reports, and actually how good this album could have been by getting rid of the Whales song, putting in Biding My Time, which was from this era, and went on to Relics instead of some, Saint-Tropez. I would also get rid of the football chanting. I think that ruins Fearless.
That doesn't bother me as much. I mean, that's just what it is. But I think the Whales song feels very dated in what is an otherwise, spectacular half of music. And then Saint-Tropez is a very throwaway song. And they did have Biding My Time, which is an absolute cracker. So I agree with you. I think it is absolutely one of their top albums. I'd be happy to put it at least splendid, if not banger.
Yeah, it is difficult because it is flawed. As I said, it has my heart, even though my brain says actually some of the other albums are better. But yes, I mean, the Whale song itself was quite fashionable at the time. People did have albums of Whale song and probably sat around. They must have been smoking drugs while listening to it. Otherwise, it'd be unlistenable. But it was a fashion of the time. And as with most fashions, they go out of date.
Nobody's ahead of their time completely, or nobody's completely timeless. Everybody's, only of their own point in time. So it's perfectly understandable that their stuff would sound dated in places, which funnily enough isn't necessarily true of some of their real top albums, which do feel a lot quite timeless. But Medal does feel a little bit dated, partly for the Whale song, partly also for the production, which feels a bit tatty. So yeah, Echoes is amazing. Absolutely top drawer track. I'm not sure the rest of the album is quite up to that. There's good songs in here like Fearless and One of These Days, of course. And I've got a little bit of a soft spot for Seamus, even though it's a bit silly, but it's fun. Who cares?
No, I agree. I do think One of These Days is one of my favourite tracks, but
it is very good, isn't it? Yeah.
So next we have Obscured by Clouds, another film soundtrack from 1972, which is another one I basically never listened to, don't really have a lot of interest in. And so I would be putting this in Now Special.
I think I would too. I mean, this was pretty dashed off. They'd done Medal and they were making Dark Side, and this felt very dashed off in the middle of it. And there's some good tracks on here, definitely. There's some really good high points, but yeah, I don't think it hangs together that much as a great album. Some people disagree and really do feel this is kind of a bit of a lost gem, but I just don't agree with them. I don't think it's that great. It's all right. It's Now Special.
Yeah, well summarised.
Thank you.
So next, it's 1973, isn't it? And Dark Side of the Moon.
The biggie.
Yeah. I think we discussed at the time, it's just like, I very, very rarely put this on. And the thought of listening to it, I think, I can't be bothered, not again. But then whenever you do, you are sort of bowled over by how great it is, and it is excellent.
Yeah, I think that's a very good way of putting it, yeah.
Definitely a banger.
Definitely a banger, polished production, a lot more commercial sounding, saxophone and whatnot, and female vocals. But yeah, it's not perfect either, but I mean, it's as close to perfect as they ever get, I think. And it's just, as you say, just through sort of over familiarity, perhaps, it doesn't feel as enticing to listen to as some of the others. And it also doesn't have that really big epic like Echoes and like Shine On we've got next, like Dogs. The whole is epic, but there's no single epic part in the same way as there are in some of their other albums. But yeah, it's brilliant. It's an amazing album and still one of the top charting albums ever, I think.
Yes, It is. It was in a quiz I did the other day, so it was in, I think.
What was the question?
So you had to name 3 albums in the top 10, I think it was top 20 albums.
Of all time?
Something like that, yes.
Thriller. I don't know. Rumours. I don't know what would be there.
I think Rumours was one, because I think I picked that. There was other things like Adele was in there, and there's some modern people.
Oh, well, we don't do modern people, do we?
We don't really like modern people.
So let's get back to some non-modern people.
Yeah.
Wish You Were Here, 1975.
Indeed. So I think this is a cracker as well. We ranked this 3rd. I was a bit scathing about the song, the title track, which I think was probably a bit unfair about, because again, it's one of those that my heart drops at the thought of listening to it, but then I always enjoy it when I hear it. It's just a bit of over-familiarity. Shine On You Crazy Diamond is as good as anything they've ever done, and Have a Cigar and Welcome to the Machine I've never particularly liked. Welcome to the Machine especially, but the rest of it I think is great.
Yeah, I don't entirely disagree with the first part of what you're saying. I think Overplay has made Wish You Were Here just a bit less interesting. Shine On is one of the best things they've ever made, if not the best. Have a Cigar, I think, is a great track. I love it. I think it's a really good song. Welcome to the Machine, a bit less so, yeah. I agree, but I quite like its experimental nature. And when Rog played it live on one of his tours that I saw, it was actually quite good. So I'm more positive about this, and I might rank this album top, actually. But I think it was you bringing us all down with your misery that pulled this down to 3rd.
Yeah, I have to say, it's been my favourite Pink Floyd album for a long time as well. So I think, any of the top 4 probably deserve it. And next is the top album. So that has to be a banger, 1977's Animals, which doesn't have a bad song on it, but there is something missing from its soul, which I think you pointed out was possibly comes down to the lack of Rick Wright here, keyboard playing. And I think that is what's missing.
I think that's exactly right. There's not a bad track on it, but there's something missing in its soul, and that is Rick Wright's contribution is almost, just not really there. Certainly not as a writing credit, but it does lack his atmospherics and the way he sort of softens and deepens the sound. It's very unappreciated, probably by Roger more than anybody else. It does start to feel very Roger Watersy. I mean, it's brilliant. It's a brilliant album. It's probably not their top album, but it's definitely in that top 3 or 4.
I think because Roger was taking over at this point, wasn't he? And I'm not sure he was a massive fan of Rick by this point either. So I think it was probably...
Well, I think Rick's a fairly awkward character, and Roger was being quite bossy and controlling because he wanted his vision to come out. David Gilmour was a bit distracted. He'd done his solo album at this point, or was he doing that after? Or he had a baby. He was a bit less, engaged. They were doing this in their own new studio. Rick Wright wasn't being that cooperative. Roger felt he was the only one making it happen with some justification.
Yeah,
but he's also
definitely.
quite an intimidating character, who maybe it was harder for the others to assert themselves. So I think it was that point at which the band was just kind of sick of each other.
I'm not sure they even tried to assert themselves either, to be honest. David Gilmour certainly admitted that they were quite lazy when it came to contributing. And Roger was obviously, I think, overzealous in sort of taking over and trying to push it. But it sounds like they did need somebody to push a bit.
Yeah, I think that's probably a good description of it. And by this point, the band have been working continually together in each other's pockets pretty much for well over a decade. They've got considerable success by this point. They're probably just sick of each other. And there's Roger pushing away at his next thing, and he's getting a lot more political, a lot more wordy. And the others are disengaged, other things happening in their lives. So little wonder Rog takes over and starts to sort of see himself as the leader of the group. I think he always was once Sid had left anyway, but it was just a lot more explicit by this point.
Yeah.
As a musician, even a lot of the bass parts, David Gilmour is doing them at this point. So as a musician, he's not particularly important at all. But as the sort of boss, controller, conceptual artist, lyricist, singer, he's very much, the main man.
Talking of which, the next album,
yes,
1979, is The Wall. Obviously, totally Roger's concept. By the way, we've ranked this 5th, which means we've basically got to put it in splendid, or we could move it to decent, but I think it is better than...
No, it is splendid. I think it's in the right place. I mean, it's a bit overblown, it's a bit mixed up. It's definitely got filler on it, but it's also, at its high points, it's absolutely magnificent.
Yeah, I do remember when we were listening to it, I wasn't particularly looking forward to it for all those reasons, but actually just enjoyed it so much more than I thought I was going to. And there is a bit of filler in there, and I have seen other people sort of suggesting that it should have been split up into 2 themed projects, which I think would have worked better, but it still is an excellent album.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. it is an excellent album, but it is a bit mixed up. Yeah, it's one of those ones that I'd like to be like an album doctor, where I could come in like House Doctor at the end, and sort it all out and just go, look, there's lots of brilliant stuff here. If we just move this around, put this over here, link this up with that, do this, that, the other, you could have just pulled out an absolute gem here, because some of it is just gorgeous. I mean, that guitar work around, the Another Brick in the Wall stuff. It's just fantastic, and it's so atmospheric, and there's obviously great tracks on here, but at the same time, it just becomes like a musical at some points, with Roger just telling his slightly mixed up tale of dad died in the war, neglect, mother, and suddenly I'm a fascist. Hang on a minute, what?
Yeah, it's like, what exactly happened between disc 1 and 2?
So, what happened when I was changing the record there? Blimey.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that's what I've heard somebody else make, is to actually split the theme of the loss and the mental health to create 2 separate albums might have worked better. Anything that would spare us listening to the trial would be positive.
Oh, gosh, yeah. Oh, yeah, that is... If it was just that, it would be in clanger. I still don't get how that really links in with the story particularly. I mean, I realise that he's this alienated rock star surrounded by this wall between him and everybody else, built this wall around him to protect his own mental health. But I still don't quite get how that manifests in this sort of fascist sense.
I think it's because I think his father was killed by that regime, and then the consequences actually end up turning him into this sort of hateful figure that actually caused the damage to him in the first place. And it's probably creating a circle of behaviour, which if you'd have actually separated the 2 projects, you wouldn't have had that.
Well, I've never noticed that. I mean, it does make conceptual sense, but I do feel it's a little unnecessary and a bit crowbarred. It doesn't feel like it's that important that he ends up as, this fascist figure to complete the circle. But, I don't know. I need to reflect on that, because I hadn't really thought about it like that. Anyway, let's move on, fella.
Yeah, okay. So next we get the final cut, which is from what year? I can't see it.
83.
83, thank you.
So we should say by this point that Rick Wright has been fired. Well, he was fired during the making of the Wall. So they're actually just down to the 3 of them. But on this album, Nick Mason barely plays anyway, and David Gilmour barely plays, actually. It really is Roger Waters and his mates, rather than really Pink Floyd.
And again, it continuing the theme of the anti-war, and it is very much just like a Roger Waters solo album, wittering on about politics, basically, but quite enjoyably so.
Yeah, I quite like this album, actually. It timed with being the first album I ever got, just because it came out when I was the right age, and so therefore this was my first album. In the same way as Signals was my first Rush album, and Broadsword and the Beast was my first Jethro Tull album. They all coincided with that sort of teenage years. And I've got a fondness for it from that, because I had nothing else to compare it to when I first heard it. But even then, since then, I'm probably slightly overrating it, but I quite like it. I think it's got some really good songs in it. The final cut itself, the title track, I think is fantastic. But yes, it is more of a Roger Waters album. So I suppose if you put this on expecting, Wish You Were Here Part 2, you're going to be disappointed, because you're basically getting pros and cons of hitchhiking type Radio Chaos stuff, which doesn't sound really anything like Pink Floyd, but it's still quite enjoyable.
Yeah, definitely. I don't know if it's the same, but I do still quite enjoy it. I mean, it fits in decent, which I think is about right.
Yeah.
It's certainly not a classic, but a perfectly enjoyable listen, but it's not the one you would be spinning most often, definitely.
I would agree, but I would definitely put the final cut on certainly a long list, if not a short list of top songs.
If we were going to do that, which we're not.
And I realise that's a controversial statement, that most people wouldn't put the final cut on their top 10 list of Floyd tracks, and I probably wouldn't either, but it would be on the long list if we were doing that.
Which we're not.
No, we're not. No, we're not doing top 10s.
No, silly idea.
So the band collapses. Should we talk through that?
Yeah. So Roger dissolves the band, thinking it's his band, thinking Pink Floyd have finished. David Gilmour doesn't feel that way, and carries on without him. It's just him and Nick Mason officially. To bring back Rick Wright as a session player, mainly for legal reasons. Roger's getting all litigious and cross, and they release A Momentary Lapse of Reason in 1987, which is, I mean, it is quite 80s. They've managed, the new versions now have got rid of a lot of the 80s-ness now. That has helped. But what it hasn't helped is they haven't really rewritten the songs. And it's very much sort of its time. If you consider this a David Gilmour album, it's I think one of his better ones, but it's not a great album at all. It's not one I ever go to, and I think we struggled to pick top songs off this, didn't we?
Yeah, we did, yeah. And, they tend to put things like Sorrow on I think that's on the Echoes best of, isn't it? And I just don't get it. I don't know. I just don't like this album at all. I think it doesn't, okay. First of all, Nick Mason doesn't play on it. He does play on the updated, later years box set version, and it does sound better for that. So again, Nick Mason's really just kind of hanging around. He's not really playing on it. The songs are written by David Gilmour and, other people that aren't in Pink Floyd. So Rick Wright's not in Pink Floyd, but he is playing on it. Nick Mason is in Pink Floyd, but he's not playing on it. Songs aren't really written by Pink Floyd, apart from, obviously, David Gilmour. Doesn't sound like Pink Floyd to me. It sounds like a David Gilmour. And some of it is, like that was A New Machine. Is that the one? Oh my God, that is just absolutely embarrassing. There are some bits which are reasonably okay. Signs of Life isn't a bad thing. Some of the instrumental work's quite nice. Roger Waters described it as a forgery. The lyrics very third rate, and I think that's about right. I think Roger's criticism was fair. I would never listen to this.
Yeah, I think Roger's called it a clever forgery, and I'm not sure I would be that positive about it, because to me it doesn't sound like Pink Floyd at all. I know you can say, well, it's a new era of Pink Floyd. I don't think it really is, because for the reasons you have said, it's just David Gilmour, really. Nick Mason hasn't been hitting the drums for ages, so he's not really on the album originally. And Rick Wright can't come into the band, and he doesn't write anyway for the album. So, yeah, I think Roger's actually a little bit generous about it.
Yeah, I would agree. I don't think it's a clever forgery at all. It's a forgery, maybe, but it's not a clever one.
We have to really rank this as an out special, which I think is probably being a little bit kind as well. And I would be sort of humming and, just wondering whether to put it in clanger.
I do think the later years version has rescued some of it, though, and it does sound better. And I can kind of see a little bit more what they were getting at, 'cause it's taken off some of that horrid 80s production. As I said, it's got Nick Mason back on it, so it's got a little bit more of a Floyd feel. Like you say, it's a pity they didn't choose to rewrite the songs as well, but it is a much improved version and would definitely put it quite comfortably into an out special, which is, a thin compliment, I accept, but yeah. Let's leave it there.
Yeah, okay. So the next album is The Division Bell from 1994. Very much an improvement, and this sort of does sound more like a Pink Floyd album, with Nick and Richard both actually being involved. Certainly, I think not a classic, but there is some decent stuff on here. It's certainly listenable. We rank this 9th, where does that put that? So that puts that
bottom of decent or top and out special.
Yeah.
I'd put it bottom of decent. It does have Rick Wright writing on it again. You notice that. It's got a lot more of his textural stuff on there, which I think is great. It does sound a bit more like a Pink Floyd album, although it's hard to know what a Pink Floyd album sounds like, because they've sounded so different over the years. And without Roger Waters, I don't think anything really sounds like a Pink Floyd album, but it sounds a lot more like one. So yeah, I think there's some really good stuff on here. So it's a definite listenable album.
Yeah, we did, when discussing it last time, we did say that High Hopes is definitely a high point of that album.
Yeah, I think yeah.
And I think it's the one track from the sort of the new Pink Floyd, if you want to call it, that gets onto the best ofs, and you think, fair enough, this is an excellent track.
Yeah, I think that is the only track which is undoubtedly, a top Floyd track, and the guitar work on that, the play out on that is just absolutely gorgeous. I do think it suffers with the lyrical situation, because a lot of the lyrics are written by Polly Samson, his wife, who's a great writer. But being a writer isn't the same as being a lyricist. So sometimes the words can feel a little bit kind of clumsy in his mouth and a little bit too overwritten. Lyrics don't often look good on paper. They look a bit silly sometimes. And I kind of just wonder if sometimes the lyrics are a little bit overwritten, and if the scansion isn't quite right, if they're a bit clumsy. And it feels a little bit like that sometimes. And in High Hopes verses, it just feels like there's too much going on in the words.
Right. So the final album is the tribute to Rick Wright, who has passed, which is basically a collection of lots of outtakes and sessions, largely from the Division Bell, but also some other bits and pieces. This is The Endless River from 2014. Personally, I don't think they made a great job of it. There was a bit about Rick Wright, which is sort of very low in the mix. And I think really making it a single album would really have helped here. And I do think I would be putting it in Now Special, which I think it would, it goes into that anyway. But looking at our ranking, not awful, but a lot of this stuff is on the cutting room floor for a reason.
Yeah, I think we probably ranked it a little bit too high because at the time I actually found it quite nice to put on and listen to as background music. And there's some really nice stuff in here and some nice ideas, but they're not made into songs. They're just left as cutting room bits and bobs. And therefore, it does feel underwhelming. And you think, well, this could have been quite nice, quite good. As you said, maybe made into a single album, maybe actually turned into songs. But it goes back to the point we've made a few times about Gilmour in particular, and maybe Gilmour and Wright as well, is that they're good music writers, they're not good songwriters. Pulling these musical ideas into tight songs, which are actually quite listenable and enjoyable, isn't their forte, but they are pretty good at writing music. And this just feels like they've just plonked lots of musical ideas on, which I suppose literally they have. Somebody pulling those into songs, which would, be Roger in the old world, could have made something pretty decent here.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you there. And that is it. We are done.
I would move it around a little bit, but, more or less okay with it.
Yeah, I agree. I think that they're pretty much, I think the albums are generally on the right tiers. So,
yeah.
If not in exactly the right order. So, quick reminder that you can find all the links and articles at jeffreymusic.rocks.